All right, welcome to Halitics on Monday. It is Martin Luther King Day, and I'm going to do something a little different from my past practices on Martin Luther King Day. Arlen, I don't know if you remember, but back in the old Monterey days, back in the day, if you will, I used to play Dr. King's speeches on Martin Luther King Day. I view him as perhaps the greatest of all Americans, or on the very, very short list. Maybe you throw Abraham Lincoln on there and maybe FDR and a few others, but I would play his speeches. Today, I'm going to just show some quotes, but I wanted to start just by asking you if you think his legacy is starting to maybe fearfully, unfortunately, fade. I mean, you got to be in your 60s now to remember him. I think for most Americans, he's just a name and in a dusty history book, unfortunately, and we don't really know as much about him, and especially his really radical views. He's just kind of, he did something in the 60s and now we have civil rights, not a guy who really fought, and to a significant degree, very successfully, to transform society. So are we losing his legacy? Are we losing his memory collectively in this country, in this society?
Well, I think it's inevitable. I mean, as the years passed, like you say, people don't remember him. People don't have, they weren't around when he was around. And so that's going to be a problem. And yeah, his ideas, you said, were fairly radical, but yet at the same time, there were others that were much more radical than he was, the Malcolm X's and people that felt he should be more aggressive. And the civil rights movement should come out and be more violent or whatever. But he resisted, and he said, you got to do it peacefully. You got to do it, without hurting people, without violence. And that was smart, because eventually, we did get a lot of bills passed, a lot of things that I think increased the progress of Black Americans.
When I say radical, I really am talking also about his Poor People's Campaign. I'm talking about his anti-war views.
Yep.
He didn't confine himself by any means to simply talking about the plight of African Americans and the need to guarantee all civil rights. I mean, he was focused really on redistributing wealth and ending our foreign wars, and that really was very radical and remains to this day.
Yeah, he didn't just focus on just civil rights. He focused on everything, all the violence around him. The Vietnam War, people like to kind of forget he was against the war, but he very much was. And, he made a lot of enemies. And as we know, the White House would, spy on him. And they didn't like him, especially J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI chief. So he had a lot of enemies, but, he also accomplished a lot and got people, to do work without violent action. So I think it was a good, overall, he's great. And also he's probably one of the best, if not the very best public speaker of any American we've ever had.
Oh, no question. The speech making was just extraordinary. The delivery, the articulation were at a completely different level. And I don't think we've seen anyone his like since. Barack Obama spoke very well. I give him credit for that. But in terms of also just the integrity behind his message, King, more than anyone I can think of in history, period, truly lived he had his peccadillos. I'm not saying he was personally a perfect person. He clearly wasn't. But there never no whiff of ever corruption, self-dealing. He wasn't ever acting, as far as I can tell, in his own self-interest. He was truly committed to making the world a better place for all. I say for all poor, struggling, and working people. And I'm not aware of anyone who comes close to that.
A little while ago, I heard one of his more famous speeches, actually the one, I think it's I Have a Dream speech. And he says, I may not get there with you. I mean, he was so prophetic, because the very next day he was assassinated. He's got an amazing life story.
Oh, yeah. Well, I just think the sad thing is that there was an idealism to King that we saw among many, I think, in the 60s. And certainly there were many people who were clearly in it for themselves. And, people who took over presidents' offices at Columbia and the like. Rubin, I think, was the guy's name. It clearly turned out to be, selfish, narcissistic people. But there was also a real idealism in the anti-war movement, and even more so in the civil rights movement that was exemplified by Dr. King. And I don't see that there's anything in society today that approaches that. Even when you look at kind of identity movements like the trans movement, to me, the leaders of those movements are focused on their own identity with little or no regard for, and I don't mean just to pick on the trans community, I mean just about every identity group. They don't seem to, for example, the argument that you hear among many in the civil rights, not the civil rights, I shouldn't say that, but in Black Lives Matter movement, among some, that about when they talk about white privilege, you would have never heard Dr. King use the term white privilege. He was laser focused on making on life better for, as I keep saying, all, and I try to focus on my program, all poor, struggling, and working class people. And he didn't see color in that regard as though it was color that created an injustice. He saw it as poverty, which of course terribly afflicted Black people, and racism. But it was the society itself that he felt needed transformation, not just to kind of rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic. So I don't think we have anyone like that. And I think it's incredibly unfortunate. I don't know what I try to mirror his values. I'm sure I come up short in a myriad of ways, but frankly, Arlen, is there any politician out there, anyone you can see who really, maybe Bernie a little bit, but he seems captive too to the, forces of partisanship, and rather than demanding the best from everybody, regardless of their party, regardless of who they are.
Well, the sad thing is Martin Luther King was one of a kind. There's nobody that's come along since he passed away that comes anywhere close. I mean, we've had some Black leaders, the Jesse Jacksons and the Al Sharpton now, but they're no Martin Luther King. Nobody really is. Just like there's no Jack Kennedy or Robert Kennedy. I mean, these people were cut down in their prime, and no one, has come along to replace them that is anywhere near, where they are. But yeah, King was very special, very, he'll go down in history as a great man, but he's gone, and not everybody would agree with him about nonviolence.
Well, do you think that the fact that, as you said, he did make a lot of enemies, is that a requirement? I mean, if you're going to be a great person, if you're a great leader, don't you have to make powerful, influential enemies? Isn't that really the only way to make real change, is to wrest power from those who are lording it over everybody else?
So you're talking about Donald Trump then? He's made a lot of enemies.
Well, he's not in power right now, but that is my question. Yeah, don't you have to be somebody who, and not just take power from those who are lording it over everybody else, but redistribute it down? Which obviously, yeah. I mean, Trump did take power, it's true, to a degree, if that's where you were going with that, from the corporatocracy in 2016. But he did very, very little to redistribute the wealth and power down. He took more for himself. And sadly, the Obamas did the same thing. The Clintons did the same thing. None of them in recent years have used their influence, their power, to improve the lot of poor, struggling, working people. So I think that's my question. If you're really going to make big, powerful, if you're going to make real change, don't you have to piss off the power elites?
Oh, yeah, it's inevitable. I mean, if you want to have something important, something radical, you're going to upset a lot of people. And, Dr. King had many enemies during his time. And a lot, like I say, the government was against him. The FBI was against him. A lot of people were against him. They ignored his calls for, anti-war the legislation for Vietnam. So, yeah, you're going to make a lot of enemies, and that's just inevitable. It comes with the territory, and he made his share.
All right, well, Arlen, we're in a presidential year. And so I thought I would look, because you and I disagree, and I disagree with many people that I know, certainly that I spend my time with, who feel that you do have to vote for Biden and the any blue will do kind of mentality, with which I disagree. And I was thinking about, could anybody persuade me differently? Could anyone persuade me, no, you have to vote for Biden despite his full-throated support for the arguably, and we may or may not get to whether Israel is a genocidal state at this point. I mean, I think it's a close argument. I sometimes have referred to Israel as genocidal. I was taken to task by one of my viewers for that. And I have to admit, it's not, to my way of thinking, clear cut one way or the other. So I should be a little bit more circumspect in my language with regard to Israel. But regardless, there are many who say to me, it doesn't matter how badly how much we support Israel, no matter how much Biden supports endless war in Ukraine, doesn't matter about greenlighting all these new oil and gas programs or the LNG. None of that matters. The only thing that matters is defeating Donald Trump, or if not Donald Trump, as Barry Lynn said on Thursday, the Republican. And, I rejected that. And I was thinking, is there anyone who has the kind of gravitas who could persuade me otherwise? And I was thinking, well, if Dr. King were alive today and he said, Hal, I get all your criticisms of the Democrats and everything you dislike about Joe Biden and, pretty much the entire party. But at this point, I have to say that we do need to hold our nose and wade through the piles of manure and get to the voting box and vote for Joe Biden. And if Dr. King said that to me, I would listen. I'm not sure I would be persuaded, but I would listen. So I decided, and I know I'm talking a lot here, but I want your take on this. I decided to go back through his record and see what he said when he was confronted with choosing between two less than perfect candidates. The only election that I could find where he actually made any statements whatsoever was 1960, Nixon versus JFK. And you can see his official statement, and I highlighted it. It says this, but I think it was thus devoid of partisan political attachments. I'm free to be critical of both parties when necessary. Interesting, isn't it, Arlen? He was saying, hey, I can't support either one, partly because I run a nonprofit, but also I want to be able to say very harsh things about the Democratic Party as well as the Republican.
Well, this of all times is totally different than any other time. We've never had anybody like Donald Trump, and he's pretty much destroyed.
Richard Nixon was on the ballot. I mean, a lot of people feel like Nixon was voted the worst man in the world in 1972. Arlen, you, I'm sure, remember that.
Yeah, but
or
he
74,
was,
whenever Watergate came to light. I guess it was 74.
Well, he was relatively mainstream in a lot of areas. I mean, he tried to get involved with China, tried to improve our standing there. But Trump is totally different because, like I say, he's ruined the Republican Party. They're now just a personality cult, and they're all scared of Donald Trump. And he's talking about all kinds of terrible things about our government and shutting down things and becoming dictator. And, he's one of a kind. And I think democracy is on the line here. I think if he got elected, I think we were no longer be a democratic small d government. And so that's why I think it's urgent that we vote for.
So you
Biden,
think Dr. King, so you are willing to invoke the spirit of Dr. King in support of Joe Biden for president?
It's amazing to me that nobody is in the Democratic Party is challenging Joe Biden, because Joe Biden has a lot of weaknesses, and he's unpopular in so many ways.
Well, there are people who are challenging, but they're definitely third tiers, right? Marianne Williamson, and RFK Jr. isn't even doing it. Then there's some other guy from the House. I forget his name. He's a representative. So there's a Cenk Uygur. Is he in there? I think there's a few people who are in the primary, but there's no one who I guess is of,
Yeah, there's
has
nobody
any
that
real
everybody knows.
ability to confront Biden the way, say, a Bernie could. Would you want to see Bernie run against Biden?
Well, that's a tough one because Bernie is just as old. I think he's
Yeah.
82, in fact, and that's really sad. But Bernie's seems to be still sharp and still on top of things, and I'd certainly rather have him there than Joe Biden. But I don't think it's going to happen. I know
Well, it's definitely not going to happen because he said he's not going to run. But I'm with you there. I was not in favor of Bernie running. I would have liked to have seen someone truly. I would have liked to have seen Dr. West. Well, but this is for the Democrats. I'm glad Dr. West decide not to run as a Democrat. I'm very, very upset he's not running as a Green. So you're not willing to say at this point that Dr. King would endorse Joe Biden, but you believe, regardless of whether he would or wouldn't, there's still a moral obligation to vote for Biden, despite all the problems I've articulated.
I'm totally sure that Dr. King would want to vote for Biden, considering the alternative. Unfortunately, we have a system that we can only have two choices, and one choice is horrible and actually, endangers our democracy. And then you got Biden, and Biden actually has done some good things, even though he's also done some things not so well. But I mean, the economy is improving. He's got to really put out his message and make people understand that he's actually done a lot of things, and all the horrible stuff, the criminality that the MAGA cultists talk about, is just plain, there's nothing there. He's an honest guy. He's relatively moderate. And, maybe by by next November, people will see that. But right now he's not very popular.
All right, you're watching Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg, of course. I do want you to click like and subscribe. We are seeing the number of subscribers tick up ever so slowly, and I'll take it. Hey, I'll take slow growth. I'd much rather have fast growth, but I'll take slow growth. So again, please click like, click subscribe. You get to see Arlen every Monday. Arlen, your program last week when we talked about your book, Potty. What is it? Life of the Potty. Had a really good response. A lot of people enjoying Life of the Potty. So I hope that you bring them in again this week, this Monday, as we talk about Dr. King. Now, I pointed out that Dr. King did not endorse anyone in 1960, but to be fair, he made it clear right after he said, I'm not endorsing anyone, that he did, in fact, support John F. Kennedy. He noted here, I'm deeply grateful to Senator Kennedy. He did not mention Kennedy's opponent, Nixon, in any way. So I think it was pretty clear that he appreciated Kennedy's support when King was in jail. King had been arrested. He wrote, I guess that was when he wrote a letter from Birmingham jail. And Kennedy and his brother did do what they could to get him out. I think that was one of their more their higher moments. RFK Jr. did it. I'm not sure which one, either RFK, not Jr., RFK or JFK Jr. did approve the wiretapping that was started by and pushed by Hoover. That said, I think Hoover had a lot on JFK, and he was afraid that, by the way, it wasn't JFK Jr. either. Neither was a junior. They both had juniors. Their dad was Joe Kennedy, and John's brother Joe was the forgotten Kennedy. I think he was the junior. So the two FKs there were also afraid of Hoover. And who knows whether Hoover had some involvement. Conspiracy theory alert. Who knows? Maybe he had some involvement in the assassination. It's certainly not. Wouldn't put it past him. Let's put it that way. Wouldn't put it past him. So yeah. So in any event, King was not above getting involved, waiting in presidential politics. He did didn't endorse Kennedy. He said he would vote for Kennedy. So that seems to support your theory that perhaps, and when confronted with the specter of a Richard Nixon, who I've argued was, I don't think I even argue. I think I've demonstrated was a worse president than Trump. Of course, Trump has 4 more years, so those who want to say he'll be even worse then are free to say it. But to date, Nixon a worse president, and between Kennedy, who had his flaws, and Nixon, King did indeed endorse, or didn't endorse, but did in fact say he would vote for, and he did say it according to this letter. One of King's his secretary did say Here he said it's not an endorsement. My mentioning Kennedy is not an endorsement, but in fact, his secretary did say privately Dr. King intends to support Senator Kennedy. And clearly, Kennedy was the one who was much more inclined to be in favor of civil rights. Go ahead. I interrupted you, Arlen. Go ahead, please.
I'm just saying, definitely, Martin Luther King was, in favor of people like John Kennedy and the other Democrats. I can't see him ever voting for Republican, which is kind of interesting because a couple of years ago, there were a few Republicans trying to pretend that Martin Luther King is really sort of pro-Republican in a lot of ways. And do you remember that? I mean, it was...
I do. I would agree with you. I would say King's pro-peace views, his pro-environmental views, we've got some quotes, we'll get to them, and most importantly, his pro-labor views would make him completely anathema in the Republican Party, but also in the Democratic Party. I mean, it's not like there's any Democrats who are endorsing or who are anywhere close to where King is either. Bernie would be the only one, and as we're often told, he's not even a real Democrat, socialist. So I don't know where to go with that. Yeah, he wouldn't support the Republicans. I can't believe he'd support the Democrats either. Let me see if I can but go ahead. I mean, I know we have different views about the Democrats. I think if you look at the record, it's hard to find a lot of light in Democratic policies or actions in these dark times, Arlen.
That is true. It's just that the other party is just a hell of a lot worse and very dangerous to our entire system of government. So we have really no choice in the system that we have now but to vote for Biden. At least I believe that.
Is that always going to be the case, Arlen? Is that ever going to change? Because if you heard what Barry Lynn said, just to harken back, he argues that Nikki Haley and DeSantis are as bad or possibly even worse than Trump, or certainly as bad. So if every Republican is as bad as Trump, and if we have to vote for the Democrat no matter who because Trump is that bad, and all the Republicans are as bad or worse than Trump, then can we ever hope to vote for somebody who is better than Joe Biden, who isn't as bad as Joe Biden? Or is that something that we're never going to get?
Well, we don't know what's going to happen 4 years from now. Obviously, Biden will not be running 4 years from now, and somebody else on the Democratic Party will have to be doing that. So we don't know. But yeah, the system as we have it set up in this country is just so not workable. I mean, it doesn't function well. You have the Electoral College, which has nothing to do with whoever has the most votes. It favors the small states, and what we really need to do is amend the Constitution, but that's not going to happen. So, I don't think we're going to get another
democracy, because you said that we need to vote for Biden to save democracy, but now you're saying we're not going to get candidates that are good for our country regardless, of who we vote for. So if that's the case, then do we even have a democracy?
Well, that's questionable, but I think, we're never going to get somebody as progressive as you are or as I am. It's just not going to happen.
We were close. Bernie was close. I mean, I would say Bernie's probably as progressive as you. Look, Bernie was all in on Medicare for all. Bernie, in 2016, Bernie talked about trade, which to me is an incredibly important issue. He's pretty good on foreign policy. Bernie's pretty close, no longer was pretty close to my deal, and he almost won.
Well, I love Bernie too, but the fact is he didn't win, and he probably it would have been difficult for him to win against the other. Isn't
that because the neoliberal elites who control both parties were afraid of him and would have preferred Donald Trump to him, or anyone basically to him? And in fact, wouldn't he have beaten? Nate Silver says that if Bernie had been the nominee, he would have beaten Trump.
Well, we don't know that. That's speculation.
We don't know it, but a lot of the issues. Look, Trump won because of the Obama to Trump crossover voters. Trump won because in areas that had been decimated by trade and by endless war, and those were Bernie's issues, just as even more so than Trump's.
Well, yeah, the whole Trump phenomena is crazy. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. He has very radical views, and people are willing to believe whatever he says, even though the evidence is against it. And he's got people that treat him almost like a religious figure. In fact, he's trying to promote that in some of his.
I mean, don't you think it's because, at least to a degree, you don't think it's because he presents himself as a pro-working class candidate? And to just blame it on something like racism, isn't that too facile, Arlen, given that his support, it seems by all accounts, is now ticking up among people of color?
Yeah, Trump is certainly a phenomenon that we've never seen before, and he's going to say whatever is going to help him win. If he thinks it helps him to be pro-worker, he'll say he's.
But why don't Democrats then follow the same strategy? Why don't Democrats go into the Rust Belt and start talking about bringing good jobs back with tariffs? Why don't Democrats argue against the endless war that Trump successfully argued against in 2016? It seems to me that Trump has laid a foundation for a successful campaign that in many ways would suit the progressive Democrat far better than it would suit Donald Trump or in the Republican Party.
Well, there's no doubt that the Democrats have to have better messaging. They're not really.
Well, I don't mean message. You say message. I say policy. Forget about message. Why don't they pursue the policies that would, in fact, make life better for working class people? And isn't their failure to do that the real reason that Donald Trump may win this election?
Well, I think, if you're objective about everything, Biden has done very well for working people. Unemployment is down. There's so many more jobs being created. The stock market's at record high. People have to understand that inflation's coming down. People don't really understand that now, but the Democrats have to really push that message as well, I think, as quoting the crazy things that Donald Trump says.
I think most Americans don't feel like life is getting better for them. I don't think it's that the messaging is poor. I think that inflation has hit people hard. And I think there's a recognition that even to the extent that there may be slight upticks or improvements now and again, the long-term trajectory under the Democratic Party and under most Republicans, except for Trump, and this is why Trump is so popular in the Democratic Party, the long-term trajectory has been against working people regardless of who's in power. And Trump and Bernie are the only two who really have persuasively spoken out against rule by elites.
Yeah, the Democrats definitely have to push their pro-worker stances, their pro-worker policies, and they have to do it far better. Let's face it, the messaging is not good, and they have to really get in there. So you don't think
it's the policies? You don't think it's the free trade policies that Obama pursued? You don't think it's the war, the fact that we're constantly on a war footing? You don't think those are the reasons that Democrats are unpopular? You think it's just people are too stupid to realize how good they have it when Barack Obama and Bill Clinton and Joe Biden are president?
Well, when Barack Obama was president, people hated him, and he was pretty reasonable about it.
He wasn't hated. He won re-election by well over 50% of the vote.
Yeah, he didn't have
He had much higher approval ratings than Biden has now. And his popularity started to wane, but it's not fair to say that. I mean, I think a lot of Obama's policies were terrible. So people do want to cut the president a lot of slack once he's in office. But in the end, I think, Arlen, it's not fair to blame voters for their disenchantment with Democrats.
Well, I do blame voters in the sense that they're not really following information that they should be following. If they really examine Trump and the things he says, who would vote for him? No reasonable person would vote for him. But he has a way of being, he's the number one con man of all time, and he's charismatic, which is totally opposite from Biden, unfortunately, because Biden is not charismatic, and he doesn't inspire people the way that Trump does for the right wing. And, that's going to be a problem. And he's 81 years old, and he's very soft-spoken, and, that's a big part of the problem, I think.
All right. Well, I'm not getting anywhere with you, Arlen, so I'm going to move on. You're watching Halitics. Click like, click subscribe. Please call in. Love to hear you join this debate that Arlen and I seem to have pretty much on a weekly basis. 240 242-5646. There's the number. I had to pause just to remember it. And by the way, you may still hear I'm still got a little fry in my throat, but it's better. Hopefully I won't start coughing. The question I had asked in the Facebook group, and please, by the way, join the Facebook group Halitics. It's pretty lively in there. Who would King support? And I didn't put their name. You can find out if you want to know who wrote this. It's very easy to find out. Just go join Halitics. But I don't like to expose people unless they're on the program with me. And I also asked this individual to call in, so maybe they will. Their answer was RFK Jr. And I, just like I don't get anywhere with you, Arlen, I feel like I don't get anywhere with anyone because I feel like I've made the case very well I really do, very powerfully, that RFK Jr. is no Dr. King. He's not on the side of Dr. King. He's not on the side of justice for poor, struggling, and working people any more than Joe Biden or Donald Trump is. He is, as I note, all in for the Israeli genocide. He's a neolib crypto kook. And King would, I believe, back, and I believe very strongly, would back either Jill Stein or Cornel West for president. Probably Jill Stein because Cornel West isn't running as part of the Green Party and doesn't have any plan for any kind of ongoing pressure, any ongoing movement, just his own campaign, which was very, very different from Dr. King, who worked with all the institutions he could and, was the leader of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. So he would not appreciate the fact that Cornel West seems to be running a campaign of personality, cult of personality. So I do think it's Stein that he would support, and I'll get into more of that. But any thoughts on RFK Jr. before we move? Stay on King though, Arlen.
I'm glad to see he's not making any real progress because I think people are starting to recognize he's not a real Democrat. He's spoken before Republican audiences, and they like him for a lot of reasons, mostly because he's not Joe Biden, and but he isn't anything like the Kennedys that we once knew, the John Kennedys, the Robert F. Kennedys, the Ted Kennedys. He's nowhere near that. And most of his family doesn't think he's really playing with the full deck anyway.
Well, Arlen, do you have a problem with people or Democrats or progressives speaking in front of Republican audiences? I mean, I thought it was great that Bernie, for example, went and spoke to the Republicans, or at least I would assume most are Republicans in West Virginia, and got a very, very welcome reception. Shouldn't we want our electeds to speak to as many people as they possibly can?
Well, yeah, I agree with that, Hal. But the difference is that when Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was speaking, people liked him on the Republican side. They really, wanted him to do well because he would hurt the Democrats. So, that's the only reason.
Bernie got a very popular response too in a state that went for Trump by over 30 points versus Hillary Clinton. So he was liked there too.
Well, certainly, and I like Bernie Sanders as much as you do, but RFK Jr. is no Bernie Sanders.
Well, I agree, and I think the difference is their messages. Bernie's message is pro-peace, or mostly, and in fact, we might get into that, I'm not sure, a little bit later, his message on Israel, which a little late. I wish it had been a little stronger and a little earlier, but still good. And he's certainly pro-healthcare, Medicare for all. That's something that RFK Jr. obviously can't be bothered by. So yes, to me, the question is message more than anything else in policies, and Bernie's policies are outstanding, whereas our friend RFK Jr.'s are far from that. All right, speaking of peace, speaking of perhaps I think it is the moral issue of our time, what's happening in Gaza and our need to stop it by any means we possibly can without more killing. Here's what Dr. King had to say. World peace through nonviolent means is neither absurd nor unattainable. And I think this is the most important part of all this. All other methods have failed. I think that statement there, Arlen, in Ebony Magazine, you can see, I rest my case. I don't rest my case, but I could rest my case that this demonstrates that sorry, I confused them. I'm so sorry, Dr. King, that Dr. King would support Jill Stein because of his commitment to world peace, whereas Joe Biden seems clearly committed to Israel regardless of the costs in life.
Well, I think he would be I think a reasonable person, Dr. King, and he would realize that if he voted for Jill Stein, that Jill Stein's not going to win. So, and it'll leave it open for Trump to win. And Dr. King would never allow that to happen. So I think he would be voting for Biden.
Yeah, well, you always resort to the only choice is either Biden or, the end of the world. And that would be your argument if it were Haley or DeSantis also, correct, running?
Well, yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we have a political system that is not democratic. It's not really fair. It's stupid, and it doesn't get the right people in there. And, it just needs an overhaul. And we're probably not going to get that overhaul, not for a long, long time.
Well, wouldn't we be most likely to get that overhaul if the Democratic Party leadership recognized that the only way they could win elections with any degree of confidence, with any degree of consistency, is if they overhauled it?
Well, they do have to do some things. They have to be stronger going against Israel and challenging Israel and saying, hey, we're not going to give you the same kind of money we are if you continue what you're doing. They've got to do things like that. And, similar things that make them a little more progressive than they are now. Because I agree, they're not as progressive as I would like and not as progressive as you would like.
Well, yeah, I would just say they're not even progressive. And I would say their policies, and being progressive is important, but I think more important than that is simply, as important as that is, if you want to win elections, you just have to be on the side of poor, struggling, working people in an economic sense. So for putting aside progressivism, I don't say they're unimportant, but social justice issues are really important. Issues like choice, reproductive rights are really important. But if you want to win elections, you have to do one of two things. You have to appeal to poor, struggling, and working class voters. And Democrats don't do that. Republicans do that, certainly with hot button issues like, again, reproductive rights, like gay rights, like immigration, which we're going to get to in a moment. Democrats, at one time, when we had a party of FDR and LBJ, did appeal to working class voters on pocketbook issues, but now they won't even do that.
Biden has made these small little steps toward, helping unions get better strength and having more of a chance to win. And unions are doing pretty well now compared to what they've been doing, years from now. But he didn't stick it out. He didn't keep going, and he should do more, to show that he's for working people, for average people. And, he should push the union movement more. So, he's not doing what I'd like him to do, but he's certainly better than the opposition, which wouldn't even allow unions probably.
Well, it's certainly true that Trump is a very anti-union president and a terrible president. And I'm not going to ever defend Trump. I'm only going to make the point that I'm not going to defend Biden by pointing to how bad Trump is either. RFK Jr., this statement, I think, is proof positive to my Halitics poster that Dr. King would never have supported him. Israel is a bulwark for us. It's almost like having an aircraft carrier in the Middle East. So RFK Jr. viewing our support for Israel, our full-throated support for Israel, with now over 24,000 Gazans dead, as based simply on geopolitical military concerns. There's no way Dr. King could have possibly seen that in the same way.
Well, you're right. There's no way in the world that Dr. King would support what Israel is doing now, killing so many innocent civilians. There's no way in the world that he would, Martin Luther King would have accepted that or allowed that or endorsed that. But, he would definitely not, he would be more like Bernie, I guess.
All right, today is, Arlen, the day of the Iowa caucuses, and I do want to talk about them. But again, this is your day. This is Arlen's day, and you did send me a link to this story, and this is as good a place as any. It's right, timely, given what we've been discussing. So I just want to throw this out there real quick, and you can make your case for Bernie. I thought it was very nice what he had to say. But there it is from Business Insider.
Yeah, Bernie's a little slow coming aboard this stuff, but at least he's working on it now, and he's got to really push it now, and he's got something in bill in Congress that if it passed would make it much easier for peace prospects, let's say, and kind of tamp down Israel's aggression.
Yeah, and I'm glad he said that. I'm glad he didn't mince words. Killing children is not the solution, obviously. That is not mealy mouths. He's being straight up, and I appreciate that. And this also from the article, let me show it. And then we're going to get, I promise, folks, if you want to talk, if you have a question about the Iowa caucuses, please call in. Arlen is somewhat of an expert in that area. I think were you in Iowa? How'd you get out of there with all that snow and ice? I'm impressed that you were able to get out of Des Moines in the first place.
Yeah, I've been spending all the last week in Iowa, Hal. No, I haven't. There's a lot of, there's 50 states. They're all a little bit different. Iowa's one of the worst, unfortunately, because their Republicans are very extremist, I think, in a lot of ways.
You're going to make a lot of friends in Iowa, and I'm sure they will now vote however Arlen recommends in thebigpicturereport.com. Don't forget that. And folks, don't think I forgot about thebigpicturereport.com. I did check it before the program. There were no new posts that I saw, at least, since Life of the Potty. So that's why we're not promoting thebigpicturereport.com. There's your additional quotes there. Biden needs to be tougher on Israel. He admonished Bibi, who has said nothing will stop us, which goes to that question, is this a genocide that we're witnessing? And you see the numbers there. They're awful. I mean, I don't know what word to use, Arlen.
Yeah, I'm not sure if genocide's the exact right word, but it's certainly cruel and, it's just terrible, terribly violent. And when you have civilians who are being killed and Israel says, oh, no, we're not targeting civilians, but yet they're dying all the time, women, children. I wish Biden would come on stronger against what Netanyahu is doing. And, Netanyahu's in Israel is somewhat like Trump is here. He's very right wing and doesn't give in on anything. And it's very much a warmonger, which at least Trump is not. I'll give you that. But yeah, Biden really needs to step up and push Netanyahu and push Israel into a more peaceful type of program.
Well, we'll talk tomorrow. We may not get to the discussion of whether the occupation in Gaza, whether the ongoing bombing in Gaza is genocide or not. There's a debate. We'll get to that probably tomorrow, mainly just because we don't have time. And I do want to have Arlen focus a little bit on the Iowa caucuses. So, Arlen, let's get to let's see. It's the Hawkeye State. So let's go to the Hawkeye State right now. See if I can get my quotes up here. I think this is the one I want to look at right now first, this little slide here. And I thought it was funny. This is from 538. So that's the Nate Silver site. It's part of ABC. They've made a lot of transitions. They were part of New York Times. They were part of Sports Illustrated. And now ABC owns 538. What do you hope to see? When I say hope, what do you think would be the best result from your political partisan standpoint today, Arlen? That is plausible. Well, you could say, I hope, Asa Hutchinson wins. That's not going to happen. So what do you hope will happen that you think could very well happen today when we get the results 8:45 East Coast time?
Well, you can see that there's really two things going on. There's Trump, who is way ahead of everybody else, and certainly he's going to win, and he's going to, I'd like to have him get no votes, but he's going to get maybe half the votes or more. And then the other part of this caucus is going to be Haley versus DeSantis. Who's going to be the alternative to Trump? And I think it looks like Haley is making a little bit of progress. She's, DeSantis has dropped a little bit over the last few months. And, Haley looks like the logical person to be the Republican nominee if for some reason Trump is not.
Well, you said that you hope or you would prefer that Trump get no votes. So that sounds to me, Arlen, as though you do think, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but you do view Trump as worse qualitatively than Haley and DeSantis, or at least than one of them. If assuming that's true for the moment, and you can correct my assumption, is that because more Trump does certainly present as a tin pot dictator, whereas we really haven't seen from Haley and DeSantis sort of that apparent desire to rule on after their 4 years in office or 8 years in office are allotted, or are there policy issues as well?
Well, we know DeSantis is, he's pretty much like Trump in a lot of ways. He has many of the same policies. And, I think DeSantis would be a horrible candidate. Haley, however, would be a better candidate, but she's got some really bad views. And the thing she said about the cause of the Civil War was horrendous. I mean, she, listed off things like, oh, it's the size of the government and all this and that, but she didn't mention slavery at all. And when she was asked about it, she dismissed it. When all of us who have studied history obviously know that the Civil War was about slavery, and she just completely ignored that.
What do you think about the efforts by some Democrats and, I'm not muted. Okay, it said muted, but I wasn't muted. What do you think about this is my new technique, Arlen, so that I'll remind myself that I'm muted and I won't talk when I'm not hot, but apparently it backfired just now. So here's my question, Arlen. What do you think of the efforts by Democrats like Jamie Dimon to get people in New Hampshire, to get Democrats in New Hampshire to cross over and vote for Haley on the grounds that she would be better than Trump, which, by the way, Barry Lynn opposes. He thinks that she's just as bad. So are you prepared to stand up to Barry Lynn and say, Barry, I don't care. You were executive director of American United versus Church and State, Separation of Church and State. You had a long-term program, culture shocks. I don't care. You're wrong. Haley's not as bad as Trump. Are you prepared to go there, Arlen?
I'm just going to say that all Republicans, especially they're all bad, especially Ramaswamy. I mean, he's awful. And, I just don't think that there's going to be any decent Republican out there, but it is true Haley would be slightly better than Trump. I don't think DeSantis would be any better, frankly. He's pretty much towing the line on Trump's views. So
he is worse, in my opinion, than Trump. I think that's a fair characterization because he's as much of a kind of a dangerous rabble rouser, or worse than Trump, sending immigrants by plane to other states. I understand why he did that, but that kind of garbage, and he is so pro-war, pro-Israel, pro-Ukraine war. At least Trump has come out against the Ukraine war. So he's terrible. I give Ramaswamy some credit because he's against all the foreign adventurism. Haley is really bad. I don't know if I'm going to say, I'm not going to choose between them. Let's suffice it to say they're all awful. We hope none of them win. I prefer they all got no votes. Would you like to see, and I've heard this, and excuse me, Arlen, that the best case scenario for those who want Biden to be reelected is Haley and DeSantis tie for second?
Well, I think Haley would certainly be a strong candidate against Trump. She's relatively moderate compared to many of the other Republicans, and she is a woman, and she's got a little bit of ethnic background, and there's things about her that some people would like. So I think she would be a tougher opponent for Biden than any of these others. But there's just nobody good on the Republican side.
Polls suggest that either Trump or Haley might beat Biden. I don't want to say they will. I think the idea that Biden has lost this election that some are presenting is totally ridiculous. The polls are very, very tight, and we both said, I've said, I think Biden probably still will win. I think Haley would lose. I think Trump is the only, to be frank, I think he's the only Republican who can beat Biden because of the name recognition, because he excites so many working class voters. And for good reason, Haley and DeSantis do not.
By the way, Hal, I did hear a poll, I think it was yesterday, that said that DeSantis and Trump are both slightly ahead of Biden, but Haley is several more points higher than Biden. I think she's like 4 or 5, maybe even 6 points better than Biden is, where DeSantis and Trump are pretty close with Biden.
I appreciate that. And of course, I could be wrong. I'm just basing this on sort of my sense. And I hear what the polls are saying. I just don't see a groundswell of support for Haley that on election day, the way I think you might get for Trump, and certainly not for DeSantis. But what you're saying may well be the case, Arlen. I'm skeptical that anyone but Trump can beat Biden. I'm not sure, and I'm not far from sure that Biden would lose either to Trump. I do think it makes sense from a Democratic standpoint to have Haley and DeSantis split the anti-Trump vote, both come away with around 18% of the vote, somewhere around there, somewhere between 17, 18, 19%. That would be the worst case scenario for them. Worst case for that would be best case for Biden. Because that would mean the primaries would continue, and there wouldn't be any kind of, at some point, everyone uniting behind Trump.
I think DeSantis would I think be more acceptable to the MAGA people, the ultra right Trumpists. I think DeSantis, because he's pretty much got the same kind of points of view. Haley would have trouble getting these kind of the crazies, the MAGA people, and if she does try to get them, then it's going to be bad for her independence and other Americans. So she would be in a tough spot. I think she's got to keep the Trump voters happy, and at the same time, not be overly right-wing and crazy like they are.
All right, Arlen, let's get to one more story. We're running a little bit behind, but not as far behind because we started a few minutes later, unfortunately, than I had hoped we would. And I take full responsibility for that. Wasn't able to get online quite as early as I'd hoped. We always take a few minutes beforehand, Arlen and I do, to prepare. So we started our prep a little tardily, and that's why we got going a little late today. You wanted to talk about immigration, and I think that goes directly, specifically, I should say, with regard to this quote here. This is in the New York Times, where a guest writer contends that Biden has to move right on immigration. I mean, take a harsher stance towards immigrants. And this, we'll get to the writer in a moment, but the point that he makes is that even Latinos who are, as I mentioned, moving towards Trump, don't agree with the Democratic Party's apparently relatively lax view of what many call illegal immigration.
I think that's the one issue I think that's going to really hurt Biden the most will be immigration, because we keep hearing about the borders are porous, everybody's coming in, and it is a problem. And I think Biden has to work a lot harder on it. He doesn't have to build a big wall, but he has to do more and find a way to get, control the people that are coming over the borders and, not allow just an open borders. So people have to understand, where he's at, and he can't be the way he is now. He's going to have to make some moves that are closer probably to Trump than he might like.
Do you think it's fair for me to argue that immigration in general is an issue that is likely to benefit Republicans? That many Americans that we're tribal, that we're biologically, innately tribal, and at the same time, we're also somewhat xenophobic. So this is an issue where Democrats are going to have a problem. The best way to address it, if you're a Democrat, is promote an economy that works for everyone so that people aren't so afraid of immigrants coming in and taking their jobs or forcing their wages down by competing with them for scarce for scarce jobs.
Well, yeah, I think I agree with you. Immigration is going to be a problem, and Trump realizes that it could benefit him because he's, very much anti-immigrant in the things he says, and other cultures, other races. He's, also kind of negative, and I think his people know that, the white people are going to be better off with him than they are with somebody like Joe Biden, and so he's going to push for that. But yeah, it's difficult, and it's a problem for Joe Biden. Immigration, the border, all of that. It's going to be tough.
All right, there's your article, front page, Arlen, and you can see it's written by Mike Madrid, somebody I've never heard of. But I was very interested, a Republican political consultant. Is this possibly a Trojan horse? Is maybe Mike Madrid coming in here presenting as an ally who wants to help the Democrats, but really is trying to undermine Biden's reelection campaign?
Well, he may not be a Democrat, but he is a co-founder of the Lincoln Project. The Lincoln Project is very much anti-Trump. So I'll give him that much credit. And I think he probably wants the Democrats and Joe Biden to win because he wouldn't accept somebody like Trump.
Well, does that give you pause then? Assuming then that Madrid is indeed sincere in his desire to see Joe Biden prevail, doesn't that make you question your support for Joe Biden? If people like Jamie Dimon, the billionaire fraudster who runs JP Morgan Bank, if people like him and Mike Madrid and Carville, if they're all in for Joe Biden, doesn't that make you question whether he's all that great?
Well, of course, the problem is, Hal, there's only two choices. And, that's always going to be the case.
So we both agree Biden isn't very good. The problem is I think he's worse than you do, but neither of us is enamored of him or with him. But the question is, from your perspective, it doesn't matter because of the specter of Donald Trump. And I cannot embrace that view. I want to just say before we call the show over, and I'll give you a final word as I always do, Arlen. I think that's why you come back, because I always give the final word. I haven't heard this from people, but I wouldn't be surprised if someone said, Hal, you're a hypocrite, you're a phony, you talk a big game now about third parties, but remember when you humiliated Ralph Nader on radio back in 2006 and blamed him for Bush? So how come haven't you completely done a 180? And my answer is no. I think Al Gore was a good candidate. I think he was the best candidate running in 2000. He had the right views on a lot of issues. And I think his subsequent positions on global warming prove that. I don't think that at the same time, W, in my view, is one of the three worst presidents ever. And he was awful, and he made this country a much worse place. I don't think Trump is as bad as W, and I think both Hillary and Biden are much worse than Gore. So it's not just that I dislike, I don't like the Democrats. It's not just that they're not perfect. It's that I think the Democrats have been nominating and running bad candidates who are bad for our country, and that as bad as Trump is, he's not quite as bad as W was. I don't think there's a big difference between the Democrat and the Republican. Today, I think there was a very big difference between the Democrat and the Republican in 2000. Moreover, I didn't like Ralph Nader, and I don't like Ralph Nader, and I do like Jill Stein, and I actually do like Cornel West. So those are my reasons. Arlen, you can respond to that or whatever you like in your peroration as we end the program.
Well, what pops into my head now is the Supreme Court. That's going to be a big issue because they've got a big conservative majority right now. And if the Republican were in there, it would just get worse. Biden at least would have some reasonable candidates for the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court needs a big overhaul because starting that 2000 race with Al Gore, all the Republicans sided with Bush. And so, it became political. The Supreme Court became political. People don't like the Supreme Court anymore. We've seen how they've taken advantage of taking things from rich people. And, so I think that's an issue we have to think about, the Supreme Court.
All right, Arlen, great ending. I got no argument with you. I agree with that assessment very, very much. And that's one of the factors that won't, but caused me to, think 3 times before calling for folks not to vote for Joe Biden. I think the Supreme Court is a great argument, and you presented it very, very well. Thanks, Arlen. I'll be back tomorrow. We'll be back Monday, a week from today, that is. Oh, I'll say for your sake. Oh, no, the 49ers don't play. They have the bye, so they'll be next week. Yeah. We won't talk football. Maybe next week. We will after the 49ers game. I'll be back tomorrow, and I will talk some genocide for you. I know you'll be excited. And it's another depressing. They're all depressing, Arlen. It's awful.
That's true. The news is tough. It's tough to watch and tough to see.
All right. And we'll have the Iowa caucuses results tomorrow as well. Again, Arlen, thank you. And you are now muted. And I am, as soon as I say two.